Hey, how's it going, guys? Welcome back. And today we're actually going to pivot just a little bit. We're really going to tackle a character that is not necessarily a comic book character, but is also an iconic character in and out of itself. I'm talking about James Bond 007. I mean, there's been some news and I'm going to talk about it in a little bit, but just briefly to touch on James Bond. I mean, 007 is one of the most iconic characters in movie history. I mean, this spanning over the last 60 to 70 years. I mean, Ian Fleming's book has spawned some outstanding movies played by some outstanding actors. You know, there's been over 10 actors to actually portray this really remarkable character. But notably, I'm going to mention just a few. One of them being Roger Moore. I don't know if you're familiar with Roger Moore. I'm actually too young to remember Roger Moore, but I did because I've watched every movie. I remember my dad, one of the very first movies I watched was Live and Let Die. And it's actually my favorite movie in his James Bond series. He did 7 movies. And as a matter of fact, in that movie, he actually ran over some crocodiles. Live crocodiles. I kid you not. I mean, you can find that scene on YouTube. I'll see if I can link it here. But it's crazy that they actually shot this. And you can actually find the production scene on YouTube. So he did 7 movies, followed closely after by Sean Connery. Really, really huge Sean Connery fan, by the way. Who also did 7 movies as James Bond. And my favorite movie of his was Goldfinger, you know. And out of his 7 movies, to me, that's the one I remember the most. That's the one I've watched the most. And I've watched all of them, you know. So I do love James Bond as well. And then obviously soon after that came Pierce Brosnan. A lot of people are familiar with Pierce Brosnan as James Bond. He did 5 movies as James Bond, and my favorite being Die Another Day. Why Die Another Day? Because it also happened to feature Halle Berry as one of the Bond girls. If you know anything about James Bond, there's been a bunch of Bond girls, right? And to me, she's not the most favorite, but one of my most favorite is Halle Berry. And trust me, when you watch Die Another Day, and she wasn't just another typical Bond girl. She was an action star. Like, she was his partner in that movie. So, needless to say, if you haven't watched Die Another Day, you should go watch it. Especially if you're a Halle Berry fan, you know. But anyway, so Pierce Brosnan obviously did that role justice. Because even though he just did 5 movies, it's really hard not to see him as James Bond, right? And this is throughout the 90s. Right? And then obviously we come to Daniel Craig. Now, for most of you, especially if you're a Gen Z or younger, you're familiar with Daniel Craig playing James Bond. He also did 5 movies. My favorite being the first one that he did, Casino Royale. That movie is so good. I don't even know how many times I've watched that movie. But with him, with Roger Moore, Sean Connery, Pierce Brosnan, we got like a prototypical James Bond. You know what I mean? Sophisticated, suave, kind of not well built, but really have this swag about them. With Daniel Craig, we actually got an interesting version of James Bond. We got a James Bond that is actually physically imposing. Even though the previous James Bonds, obviously they had their own ways of fighting and whatever, but I got tired of watching James Bond lose a lot of fights. And then we got Daniel Craig. I mean, just look at him coming out of the ocean. This was what we were introduced to recently as James Bond, and we love him as James Bond.